I want to acknowledge that we're on the land of the Bunurong and the Wurundjeri people. I pay my respects to their elders past and present, and also to the emerging leaders within the community. My name is Andy Miller. I'm one of the co-conveners for the Arts Industry Council of Victoria. It's the state's independent voice for the arts. AICV was established as a not-for-profit peak body in 1989 to enable all sectors of arts activity in Victoria to speak with a common voice. Our membership includes individual practitioners and arts organisations ranging from the small independent companies to large state cultural institutions. As the peak of peak organisations in Victoria, our membership recognises the important contribution of culture and the creative industries to the Victorian economy, that a dynamic industry should reflect our society and its diaspora relationships, that creative expression is a human right and culture is a critical element in our multicultural society and our democracy. AIC recognises that we strive for a dynamic and sustainable ecology across the state with both hard and soft infrastructure, understanding the role of all three tiers of government and the vital role of small arts organisations, independent artists and creative practitioners. We also recognise that we need to develop the workforce of the creative industries of the future. We need to see that artists have a viable career path, receive quality training, build networks and earn a living wage. So in Victoria, we recognise the refocusing of arts funding in our neighbouring states. Our state, Victoria, trades on being the cultural state of the nation. For this to continue, the aperture for arts and culture in Victoria needs to widen. So after that speech, I'd just like to do a few thank yous just to start with, because today has been made possible by a lot of volunteers and a lot of great energy. I'd firstly like to thank Tony Elwood and the Ngv for giving us this magnificent space in kind. I'd like to thank Madeline Tannhauser, she's been brilliant, Tom Deman and June Perez who's here, and also the crew. I just see Tony's just missed out on this. Thank you Tony. I'd also like to acknowledge AICV, who are a tireless bunch of dedicated individuals. I'd like to thank my co-convener, Michelle Silby, there she is, and all the executive of AICV who are here and represented in the form of pull-ups. With the exception, I think we had a minor TNA, Theatre Network Australia, pull-up disaster, but just imagine it there just to, oh, there it is, it's there. Okay, fantastic. How did you do that? That's incredible. And now I'd just like to introduce our incredibly capable moderator, Mr. Sami Shah. And thank you. And as he's walking up to the stage, just again, thank you to the three political representatives who have dedicated their time to be here today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andy. And a big round of applause, please, to Benji, who's going to be our Auslan interpreter today. My name is Sami Shah. I am a comedian, writer, and I'm the co-host of the ABC Radio Melbourne's Breakfast Show, which means I've been up since 3:30 in the morning today. If I do fall asleep during the course of the proceedings, it's a narcoleptic issue and it's nothing to do with the quality of the speakers we have on stage, I can assure you. Thank you so much for coming out here to the Arts, Culture and Creative Industries Forum, hosted by the AICV. Joining us on stage, I'm going to take you through the proceeding, through the course of the proceedings in a bit, but first I'd like to invite the three guests onto stage. Joining us firstly is Martin Foley. Big round of applause. Martin Foley is with the Labour Party and has been a member of the Victorian Legislative Assembly since 2007, representing Albert Park. He's been a Minister for Housing, Disability and Ageing, Minister for Mental Health, Minister for Equality and Minister for Creative Industries in the Andrews Ministry since December 2014. Thank you, Martin. We have also with us Heidi Victoria. Heidi is a member of the Victorian Legislative Assembly In November 2009, she was named Shadow Parliamentary Secretary for Arts following her strong involvement in the campaign to prevent the proposed changes to the Victorian College of the Arts. In 2013, she was given the ministerial portfolios of Arts, Women's Affairs, and Consumer Affairs with the Dennis Napthine Cabinet. And finally, we have Sue Pennicue. Sue is a Greens member of the Victorian Legislative Council and has been since 2006. She was elected to State Parliament most recently in 2014, representing the Southern Metropolitan Region of Melbourne, where she has lived for almost 30 years. Sue is the Victorian Greens spokesperson on education, arts, justice, corrections, police, racing, and animal welfare. Over the course of the next hour or so, I'll begin by first inviting each speaker up to present their vision for the state. And my advice to each speaker would be, this is a room full of people from the arts. They're very good at telling the difference between a press release and what's spoken from the heart. So try for the latter and less of the former. That would be excellent for everyone. After that's done, I'll ask them a series of questions. Those questions have not been shared with the guests so far, so the first time they'll be hearing it will be the first time we'll all be hearing it, except for me, I've read them, obviously. And we look forward to the answers therein. And finally, we will open the floor to Q&A from the audience, at which point I invite everyone who has questions, raise your hand. Someone will be across with a microphone. If you could limit your questions to questions and not a manifesto or a monologue, as these things tend to go, that would be greatly appreciated. And then we'll wrap up, hopefully, on time at 5:30. Thank you very much. I'll begin by first inviting to the stage Martin Foley. Thank you so much.
So thank you very much for that warm introduction. And like the Arts Industry Council, I would acknowledge that we meet here on the traditional lands of the Kulin Nation, and I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and acknowledge that 2,000 generations, 50,000 plus years of continuous cultural, vibrant operation on this land can teach us a lot in this particular portfolio, in this particular area, and no more so than I'd like to think as reflected in the first priority of our creative state plan around the recognition of First Peoples cultural plan, which we had a great pleasure in launching in Bendigo a few weeks ago. In the short time that's allowed to me here, I didn't want to go through a long shopping list of achievements over the past 4 years. What I wanted to do is just touch on the notion of what culture, art, creativity can contribute and is contributing, and I would like to think can build into the future in Victoria. Over the last 4 years, the collaborative work that we have put together and built not just a policy framework for, but rolled out an enormous number of funded initiatives shows that we can reshape how culture, creativity and its contribution to individuals, to communities, to organisations and to the state can actually reshape the conversation and the state in this first part of the 21st century. Where our ecology of creativity is deeply embedded into the psyche of the operation of the state is really the goal that I would like to think that we have set ourselves as a government. I'd like to think that it is one in which we take first and foremost the investment seriously and the significant contribution that we've made, and whilst as a result of structure of government changes, and we can't compare the old Arts Victoria model to the new Creative Victoria directly, but a 220% increase in the comparative spaces over the last 4 years of capital and recurrent investment in the sector is a significant achievement. But I think even more significant is how that investment has been co-designed, structured and delivered in partnership with the sector, or the many sectors that go towards creating the cultural, vibrant ecology that is Victoria, all the way from small independent organisations and individual creatives, all the way through to our hugely successful state cultural institutions such as the one that we are in right now. And I think that has happened through a conscious and deliberate approach to collaboration and partnership that I would like to think has changed how we can embed the conversation around creativity and the support for it, first and foremost, in and of itself as an important contribution to who we are, our notion of a people, our notion of a state, but equally having to demonstrate the social value that that can deliver, the community value that it can deliver, and, it has to be said, the economic value that we can deliver. And as we transition increasingly to that service-based economy, leave aside the mega blockbusters that we see in places like the NGV and at the Arts Centre, at the State Library and the Museum, and ACME and other places. It's how that pipeline of ecology that starts way back in the suburbs, way back in the regions, way back in the schools, in the communities that are underrepresented, be it Indigenous communities, cold communities, disability communities, where that LGBTI communities, in that inclusive notion where the real creativity is overly represented but under supported. And I'd like to think that the process that we put in place over the last few years, particularly through the Creative State Consultation Framework, where an 18-month process, over 10,000 people directly spoken to, numerous events right around the state, everything from digital online presence to discussion papers, sector efforts, all of which have gone into delivering a framework based on, and I'm sure you'll all recall, 5 essential pillars. And they reflect my vision because it reflects what I say is the co-design principle that the Victorian community had the opportunity of inputting into. First and foremost, backing creative talent, and that is creating more opportunities to produce and present great works. And secondly, strengthening the creative industry's ecosystem, and particularly building the capability and the opportunities and conditions for individuals, particularly small to medium organisations and individual creatives, to grow their success or to grow their practice. And in doing so, the third pillar, demonstrating the wider economic and social impact that creativity in all of its manifestations can drive not just innovation but wider creative impact over and above what they do as individual organisations. And in doing so, make sure that we increase participation and access. Make sure that more people are both participating in and are part of an audience and engagement with creativity in all of its different opportunities that the 21st century provides us. Obviously direct, tangential, tactile forms in real live presence, but equally in digital and increasingly virtual forms. And then finally, the building the international engagement, extending Victoria's impact and profile for global audiences, visitors and markets. And across that array, whether it's in film and screen, whether it's in contemporary music, whether it's in dance, whether it's in visual, whether it's in theatre, any number of areas, there's an enormous opportunity as to how these pillars, now having been embedded in legislation and in a policy document, a wide-ranging policy document, and now with an obligation that every 4 years the state under the law has to review and re-engage and reimagine that. So I'd like to think that the vision I bring is the one that has been co-designed and, more importantly, gives us the opportunity to continually review, continually critique and continually grow. And in that kind of context, I've also been asked to say, well, what would be the one reflection of that vision that I could perhaps end my opening comments on? And it's pretty hard because there have literally been hundreds of opportunities. But because it's one in which speaks personally to me and my family's experience, it goes to the diversity and inclusion strategy that flows from the creative state. And it goes to a program that we funded with the survivors of sexual abuse in Ballarat, and particularly the work that the DAX Centre did with survivors of trauma in that Ballarat community, all around the same time that the Royal Commission into Institutional Sexual Abuse was reporting. And a number of artists, but particularly Peter Belthorne, put together a really wonderful exhibition, not just photography, but a whole range of mediums that not just spoke of the pain and the suffering that that community and those individuals had gone through and the enormous amount of trauma and loss of life that had been associated with that, but even more importantly, the opportunity for renewal, for growth and for recovery. And that, to me, when I heard those people speak at the DAC Centre at Melbourne University when that exhibition came to town, that was amongst many, many moving opportunities that I've seen this policy and this process allow us to look to how creativity, cultural engagement can serve so many purposes. And I take those artists and those creative words for it. It can and does save lives, and it reshapes lives, and if nothing else, that is an enduring memory that I'll certainly take away out of many for the past 4 years. I think I've overstayed my 10 minutes, so thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Martin. And now next on stage, I'd like to welcome Heidi Victoria. Thank you.
Thanks, Sammy. Thank you, everybody. I'm sure stand up I'd have a good saying about everybody turning up late and the fact that it's the arts, but I'll leave those sort of things to you. It is nice to see so many familiar faces here, so many friendly faces, and so many people who I know, like me, are passionate about the arts. Lots of you I've seen in this space before, but lots of you I've seen in much smaller spaces. I want to acknowledge everybody, and I think it's certainly you've all acknowledged people before us, so rather than going through all that again, can I reiterate what my colleague and has been said before by various other speakers. I wanted to talk a little bit about my vision for what I think this state can be, but start by saying how good I think this state is. We need to remember, and I think everybody in this room remembers, that we are truly the cultural hub, not only of Australia, but of course one of the great cultural hubs of the world. And that hasn't happened by accident. It's been careful planning by successive governments of various persuasions, but it's been by the passion driven by our arts community, by practitioners, but also by patrons, and we have a wonderful philanthropic cohort here in our state who have allowed places to thrive so that we may, and I say we as a creator, for those who I haven't met, I have a Bachelor of Arts in Fine Art, still exhibiting every now and again. I've just had something come off the walls at MGA. But I do know that it's only once those great spaces are created that we get to display our works, you know, at that greater level. Our sector is obviously very diverse, it's incredibly robust, and many of our companies are internationally recognised. Our cultural collections, and can I acknowledge Tony and his team, are of course incredibly highly regarded. I'm sorry MoMA is finishing today, Tony, and our moderator has not yet seen it. Do you think you could have somebody take him around for a few quick selfies afterwards? Thank you. Just making sure that you don't miss out on the selfies. Everybody's had to have the MoMA selfies. Of course, we have a really vibrant and jam-packed cultural events calendar. And we know that cultural tourism, and that's wearing my other hat as well in tourism, provides huge economic benefit for our state. It's a really big contributor to our state's popularity as a tourism destination, including across the regions, not just here in Melbourne. But of course, that position can't be taken for granted. As I said, we didn't get here by mistake. It has been by generations and generations of people planning. And so we have a strong vision in the coalition, we have a strong work ethic, and we also have commitment to the sector and the sort of commitment that's required to keep us up at that position, but even go further in a global sense. by attending lots of events and performances, of course not just making a speech, turning up and leaving, but to actually understanding the sector is where those great ideas come from all of you. And I see many people in the room, you know who you are, who have knocked on my door countless times. And I've always had an open door policy. When I was Arts Minister, people knew they could ring the office, make time, and we would sit, chew the fat, and come up with solutions. And I promise you that that will continue if I'm Minister again after November. But of course, we need professional development and training. Our young people need to understand, and I'm living, breathing proof, that you can actually make a living as an artist. And if you go home and you say to your parent or parents, you know, at 14 or 15, and my 15-year-old daughter is here with me today, I want to be an artist, insert discipline here. You don't get that look of, oh my God, really? Can you get a serious job? Can you get something that's going to pay the bills? My vision has always been for an industry that supports young artists. That's why I set aside that land in Collingwood, the Collingwood Contemporary Arts Precinct, the balance of the land where we put Circus Oz in their brand new home under the last government. And we put aside that land after Melbourne Now. It was an idea that Tony Elwood came to me with, and he got that serious look on his face and he said, Minister, and I went, this is going to cost a lot. As many of you know, you've done the same to me in this room. Don't laugh, it's not just him. But when Tony came to me and said, I want to do this thing called Melbourne Now, I want a summer series. We do winter great, but I want a summer series. And he explained what Melbourne Now would be. And I went, well, that's a no-brainer, let's do it. Then he hit me on the way out for the money for Jean-Paul Gaultier. And I said, no-brainer for that one as well. But of course, that was the precursor for the triennial. And for anybody who is involved in the visual arts, you'll understand how important that was on a world stage. So how do we make sure that the sector is heard? How do we make sure that young people who want to work in that sector are nurtured, that they have incubators in which they can work, like what my plans for Collingwood were? And I'm very happy that PBS are now going to move down there, but there are so many others that can and need to be moving in around about now, if not before. So our vision is for inclusivity, but inclusivity for all who want to be part of our sector, but also exposure from a very, very young age. I was 5 when I first went to the ballet. We were not a rich family, it was a friend's parents who took me along, and I fell in love. I fell in love with the athleticism, the music and the magic, and I've seen about 20 different versions of Swan Lake since. So we need to start very young, then we need to encourage them if they do have that love, if they do see that passion up on stage and feel it, that it can indeed be a career. And then of course we need to support the organisations who will then go on to support them in their careers. How am I doing for time?
Pretty much wrapped up.
Am I okay? Have I got another minute or two?
A minute, yeah.
So we were asked to talk about a couple of things that we might have been very proud of. My list is very, very, very long. And Sammy mentioned before about the VCA. And again, this comes back to education. We are one of the great music theatre capitals of the world. And there was a very rough period there at the VCA where practical teaching was being reduced to an extent where people weren't going to be able to come out ready to perform. They weren't going to be job ready. And I was approached by some lecturers at VCA and said, will you help us fight? I think it was 2009, off the top of my head, 2008 or 9. And we fought. And I want to actually acknowledge Sue, who stood with me in that rally, and we marched and we stood on the front steps of Parliament and said, this can't happen. If we want to continue as the music theatre capital and all the income that that brings to this state, we actually need to be training people here. We can't be training them interstate and paying per diems. It just will mean our industry will die. We have the best theatres. but we've also got to have the best practitioners. So helping save the VCA, one of my proudest moments, and then of course making sure we followed through with the money to make sure that it was there for the future. And anybody who's been down to the stables and the conversion that was done down there, and I've got to say, I think Ken Lay, as former police commissioner, was sick to death of me coming up to him at events in Parliament House, and I'd whisper up behind him and say, "You don't need the stables." And Ken would say, "There's horses in there, Heidi," and I'd say, "There aren't. Give them to us for the arts." And I'm so pleased we managed to secure that when I was Arts Minister, and of course it has opened. So again, opportunities for young practitioners and those who want to learn in the sector. I've got lots more I'm very proud of. White Night, lots of all fabulous things. In fact, standing up on that mezzanine with Tony on the first White Night, looking out through the water wall with people herding in like cattle. And I had tears in my eyes, and he said, "Are you okay?" And I said, "No. Could you have ever dreamed that so many people would be queuing up to get into the NGV who have never been to a gallery in their lives?" And we made it happen. So lots of proud moments, and I'm sure we'll get time to chat about them. But it's really nice to see you all here. Thank you for your passion for the sector. I share it. And I want to be your minister again because I know how much more we can do. There's plenty being done, as there should be. But we need to now get serious about some of the other things. Thank you.
Heidi, Victoria, thank you so much. And finally, welcome to the stage, Sue Pennicue.
Thank you, Sammy. I'd also like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we're meeting, the Boonwurrung and Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and pay my respects to their elders, past, present and emerging, and to acknowledge that Aboriginal sovereignty has never been ceded. I'll acknowledge my parliamentary colleagues, Martin and Heidi and Sammy, and for their introductions and their words. It's the 50th anniversary of the opening of the National Gallery of Victoria at this present site in August 1968. I'm not sure how long it was after the new NGV opened that I came here as a child to marvel at the water wall and the stained glass ceiling, but it couldn't have been very long because we often came. My father was a long-term NGV member, as my mother and I still are. I was here the other day to see MoMA, and thank you, Tony and the NGV, for that wonderful exhibition. And as always, children were running up to touch the water wall. I wonder how many have done that in 50 years and gone on to love the arts. I certainly did. Thank you to the Arts Industry Council for inviting me to speak at your forum today. And for all the staff and leaders of the peak organisations for being here, and for everybody who's come today. As Sammy said, I'm the Greens representative for the Southern Metropolitan Region. In addition to the arts portfolio, I also hold portfolios of education, animal welfare, racing, justice, police and corrections. These all keep me busy, especially with the false law and order debate that is currently being run by the other parties. I'm also the Greens whip, which involves a lot of day-to-day, if not hour-by-hour, organisation with the other parties and the crossbench in the rough and tumble of a parliamentary week. I've held the arts portfolio ever since I was elected to State Parliament almost 12 years ago, and I've advocated for a range of issues in that time, including live music, the VCA, as Heidi was mentioning, the Australian National Academy of Music, the Melbourne International Film Festival and many others. Today I'd like to briefly outline the Greens' approach to the arts and cultural heritage and some ideas, and also to be open to feedback and ideas from you as to what is and isn't working well in the arts and the creative industries and what needs to be done. We know that most Victorians attend some sort of arts event in a given year. Many attend heaps of them, as I do. We all have our favourites. Mine is live music, followed by the visual arts, then theatre. But whatever it is, people love to go and consume art or participate in the arts. We know that arts are more than creative industries. Arts entertain us, they fire our imagination, they challenge our thoughts and beliefs and ideas, and they warm our heart and our soul. And that's why people do get involved in the arts and do go to see what artists are doing. The Greens supported the creation of Creative Victoria, although I personally would have liked to have seen the word arts retained in the title of it and in the ministry. It was good to see the inclusion of the principles supporting the arts and creative industries enshrined in the legislation, as Martin mentioned, such as that the arts have intrinsic value, that arts improve our quality of life and the community as a whole, equal access to opportunities to participate in the arts, freedom of people to express their ideas and opinions, and support for the arts and cultural heritage of our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. These are principles we fully agree with, and I'm sure are shared by all MPs and all parties and everyone here. However, it all depends on how well it is implemented, supported and resourced now and into the future. Creative Victoria is running a comprehensive range of programs across Victoria and covering a wide range of arts practices. But are there gaps and unmet needs? Prior to the creation of Creative Victoria, there's too many creations in that sentence. Prior to the creation of Creative Victoria, there was a lot of upheaval and uncertainty in the arts and creative industries community, and funding cuts generally here in Victoria and at the federal level. At the federal level, we need to restore the funding to the Australia Council. In Victoria, I think what is needed now is some stability, and to give the new Creative Victoria structure and the creative state strategy till 2020 a chance to work across the different sectors, while keeping a critical eye on how it is or isn't working and what can be done better. And that's where you all come in to tell us that. I think it's very important that Creative Victoria is always in touch with what is going on and what the needs of our artists and artistic communities are, particularly independent artists and small arts organisations, which can often be overlooked. While it is important to support our flagship arts institutions like the Ngv, government support at the grassroots to assist smaller local groups and independent artists is the key to the long-term health of our arts and culture. That's where we need to focus our funding and our effort. We would like to see more support for young and emerging artists as well. One of the perennial issues is how to better support artists financially. Many are not able to support themselves or fully support themselves through their art alone. Most have day jobs, or if not, they live very sparingly. The Greens have a policy at the federal level to allow artistic activities that provide community benefit to be eligible for Centrelink payments, and to implement a low-income artist superannuation supplement, because that's another area where artists often miss out. Support for the arts cuts across other portfolios too. Clearly education, which is one of my portfolios, is a key area for the arts. We need more education about more arts in the schools and in the vet sector as well, where with the cuts over the last number of years to the vet sector, some of the arts courses have gone by the wayside. So we need those back again. Also, as a portfolio holder for corrections, the arts have a really key role to play in the corrections sector, in prisons, etc., in helping rehabilitate prisoners and help them bring their lives back together. The Greens have released a policy at state level also to sell off the sale of public housing estates and to boost funding for public housing to reduce the growing number of people on the public housing waiting list and to tackle the homelessness crisis. And of course, artists are often among the low-income people who are on the public housing list or finding it very difficult to access housing. It is also vital that we protect our cultural heritage as well as to nurture new and emerging heritage. Many artists and creative industries are being pushed out because of high costs for space and development pressure that is replacing arts-producing spaces with residential development. Venues are disappearing from the CBD and the suburbs. Our planning laws don't seem to be able to preserve venues that have long-standing social, cultural and architectural heritage. For example, the Metro Palace in Bourke Street and the Greyhound Hotel in St Kilda. The Greens are exploring ways to strengthen Victoria's planning system to introduce planning laws that can preserve areas for arts production, performance venues and connected industries so that artists are not forced out. I was at an event, this is an idea, I was at an event recently and Julian Burnside mentioned an idea he has, which is a day to commemorate artists, which I think is an idea worthy of consideration. We were asked to talk about our proudest moment. So although it was a while ago, I would have to say that one of the best moments I've had in this portfolio was when I tabled the Save Live Australian Music petition in April 2010 in the Parliament. The official tabled petition had 8,837 signatures and asked for the removal of all references to live and amplified music from liquor licences and to develop a cultural policy to promote and maintain Melbourne as Australia's live music capital. Interestingly though, while 22,000 people actually signed the hard copy or the petitions that were circulating, only 8,837 could be tabled in Parliament because they didn't comply with the standing orders. This included 11,124 online petitions and 10,500 signatures on hard copy, which were signed by people in venues but didn't include valid addresses, etc., so it couldn't be tabled. The huge Save Live Australian Music rally in February 2010 and the petition led to changes to liquor licensing laws and increased government support for Music Victoria, and eventually led to the Parliament accepting online petitions last year. Thank you.
Thank you very much. What we're going to do now is I will move over there and I'll ask a series of questions of each panelist, and we will then have a Q&A shortly after that. I think we can remove the podium now. Thank you. We can just check if everyone's mics are working really quickly.
Checking. Testing.
Yep, perfect.
You don't even have to turn it on.
You do not have to answer every question. If you do have a relevant answer to each question, we'll start from Martin and then go down the line. It would be good for, if you could keep it succinct. I would appreciate that. Thank you very much. All right, the first question, starting from Martin, would be, what's your party's commitment to support First Nations in 2019 and beyond?
Well, the Creative State Strategy, as its first recommendation, had at its heart the need for a First Nations strategy and for that to be celebrated and co-designed with First Peoples. Pardon me. And our commitment is that commitment, which we had the great honour of launching with the Dja Dja Wurrung people about 3 weeks ago in Bendigo, the First Peoples strategy in place to be driven by First Peoples, and more importantly, with a strategy of support to bring more First Peoples into art, culture and creative organisations to drive that. So our policy, our commitment is reflected in the Creative State Strategy and is now reflected in the first action item of that, our First Peoples Creative Plan.
If I could put the same question to the Greens, Sue?
Thank you, Sammy, and it's a very important question. I acknowledge the strategy that Martin has talked about, but I think the key issue is to consult with the actual First Nations people wherever they are as to what's best going to suit them in terms of aspects of the strategy. So there are various clans and groups across the state, not just formal ones, but informal ones that need to be consulted about what their needs are, etc. So it's certainly a very strong policy for the Greens to support our First Nations people to participate in the arts, have their art recognised, have their cultural heritage recognised, but consult with them as to how they see it and how they want that to be implemented.
Thank you. And Heidi?
Thanks, Sammy. Look, we have a very proud history in this space. Everything from helping the Koori Heritage Trust to move to a far more prominent position, to our Indigenous screen incentives that we did while we were in government. We did the Indigenous Arts Prize and, of course, held the Indigenous Arts Awards regionally because we thought it was really important that it went around the state. One thing that I've been working on in conjunction, and until fairly recently I had the Shadow Aboriginal Affairs portfolio, and one thing that a lot of people came to me about from our First Nations people were that they wanted more opportunities to mix in that space of cultural tourism, because obviously that's a very big money spinner for the state, but also a very good way for them to be able to establish their communities and take what they do best, and their culture and their arts are what people want to see when they come from overseas. So again, wearing sort of the two hats, and I think we have to remember that all of this is cross-portfolio. It can't just be arts, or it can't just be tourism or health or whatever. But when you start mixing the portfolios together and say, okay, well, so what I'd like to announce, I guess, in front of everybody today is that we will actually have a cultural tourism policy. And so the idea of that is that there will be grants that will be available to communities to be able to establish themselves into offerings for visitation. And that's good for the state, it's good for them. We also know that those who are engaged in those types of activities have young people coming through that are more proud of their heritage, better understanding of their heritage, and of course can continue to pass it on through generations. So something that we really want to do, swap it around also so people don't feel that they have to go to Sydney or Ayers Rock or Queensland to actually go and have an Indigenous experience. They can still come to Victoria, in various parts of Victoria, see that, but it's also helping the creativity and cultural side.
Well, connected to that, really, there was an article in the New York Times about a month ago, and it basically stated that the arts funding in Australia is going to the same group of majors, which is a recipe for mediocrity, if I can quote here. Cultural cringe, in part the tendency to overvalue the culture of Europe and North America and undervalue Australia's own lingers. Many Australians in the arts argue. This, they say, plays into why the 28 majors, who mostly concentrate on traditional arts funding and repertoire, are still so revered by those who manage government funding. Given this kind of criticism, which should have been bigger news in, I think, most countries, yet somehow in Australia we kind of slipped under the radar, how will we go about achieving a healthy and dynamic statewide arts and culture ecology? Starting with you, Martin.
By sitting down with the rich diversity that is the Victorian cultural creative community, designing policies that reflect their priorities, funding them and reviewing them to make sure that they deliver the rich array of priorities that that co-design process sets. And I'd like to think that that's what the Creative State Strategy does, and I'd like to think that having ticked off nearly all of those propositions that are in those 46 action items, that we're well on the way to doing that, and that in 2020, if we're given the opportunity to form the next government, that we'll be able to take that to a new level. If I had to comment on that particular piece, Sammy, I would say the real challenge to the Victorian sector is to make sure that this kind of approach can challenge the national and indeed the interstate components that are driving those cultural organisations to look to those outcomes because of the redirection of resources away from so many of those organisations. Whether it's the Brandis cuts, whether it's the South Australian New Liberal cuts that we've seen in their budget, or whether it's the recent rorts that we've seen in New South Wales where the Sydney Symphony Orchestra, through no fault of their own, were delivered grants that should have gone to small and medium and individual creatives. Those kind of pressures drive major cultural institutions to do the less risky stuff. And what we have to do is fund the risky stuff, because that's where the interesting ecology of creativity is to be found.
Heidi, if you could respond, if you could give your answer, and then we'll move on to Sue. Just trying to change it up each time. Sorry.
Sure.
Yeah?
So one of the things that we did when we were in government was do the OIP, the Organisations Investment Program. And we didn't look at the colour of a company. We looked at what they put in the competitive world that is arts grant funding, and gave everybody their fair chance for the first time in over 40 years. And we did that, and I've got to say, you know, to Andy and Michelle, thank you so much, because your organisation was very instrumental in us consulting with the sector for a very long time. I think it was about 18 months before we finally came up with the model that we came up with. So the funding is there in the most competitive and transparent way. And I think what we have to do, and I love it when New Yorkers and people like that write about our culture and our history, but I look at what's available as far as funding goes and say, it's out there. Go for it. You know, and we need to be doing more things to actually make that possible. And again, you know, the policy that I just talked about is another one of those enabling policies to say, the incentive is there, the opportunity is there. Give us your great ideas and go ahead, go for it. For the moon, as they say.
Sue, thank you.
Thank you, Sammy. Yeah, another very important question. I think, as I was saying when I was speaking earlier, that I think the future of arts and creative industries always lies with the smaller organisations, the independent artists. Those are out there in the outer suburbs and in the regional areas, particularly at a state government level. It's much easier for a state government to be reaching out to those areas and those people and making sure that they have fair access to support and funding. And I'm not sure that that's always the case. It can be very difficult for people to navigate. You know, if you look at I would say the Creative Victoria website is pretty easy to navigate, but it's still very difficult for people who may not necessarily be tuned into these things to find the support that they need. And that's where I think an organisation like Creative Victoria and Regional Arts Victoria and others need to be really proactive about finding where the smaller organisations, the independent artists, etc., that need that support. Martin sort of stole my thunder a little bit, taking on things that are not so mainstream, the riskier projects, etc. So it's always something, I think, where are the unmet needs, where are the gaps? That's what we really need to be always focusing on.
One of the most challenging things to become a successful artist isn't the actual quality of your art, it's your ability to cut through red tape and deal with bureaucracies. How will your party ensure equality, access and engagement for various peak bodies and government departments? We can start with you. Yeah.
Sure, I don't mind. I'd like to think sometimes it is about the quality of the art. For all of you who are practitioners in the room, we all go out to make the best we can be. Now, art is in the eye of the beholder. So what you said just then, to me, sort of sends a bit of a shiver up and down my spine, saying, you know, it's not always about the quality of the art, but it's the quality of the art that that person has made. So whether they're a dancer, whether they're a visual artist, whether they're a sound artist or a live music, you know, where's Patty? You know, Patty, you know, we have this great idea that you and I sometimes don't understand each other's music. I try to understand everybody's music, but it's not always going to be music to my ears. It doesn't mean that those people shouldn't be supported. So there is, you know, there was a lot of red tape cutting when we were in government. In fact, I think we cut about 25% across the board of government because we said it is too difficult to go out there and be an arts practitioner, do your practice and be filling in wads and wads and wads of paperwork. But we also have to remember, and the three of us are politicians, that we are responsible for the public purse. So you as taxpayers in the audience also expect us to make sure that those who are receiving those grants, or if that's what it comes down to, are acquitting what they're asked to do in a responsible way. So we're responsible to the Victorian taxpayer. We should never dictate what their art looks like, but we should make it easy for them to make that art.
Sue?
Thanks, Sammy. Well, as I was saying a similar answer to the question before, which is it's smaller groups, independent artists and people in the regions and outer suburbs often find it very difficult to tap into what's available. So that's why you need Creative Victoria, Regional Arts Victoria, but also local councils supported by state governments to assist people in their local areas. Because the more local it is, the more you're going to be able to tap in, I think, rather than very central. So Creative Victoria can't just rely on its central processes. And I'm not saying it does, but it can't. So I think that's the answer, is to be proactively assisting people and having programs in place to allow that to happen.
Thanks, Sammy. By expanding the dedicated and sector-specific pools that are available for individual and small organisations to pursue, and making it easier to get access to those, and whether it be things like our Music Works program, which grows the whole pool by taking live music into its own dedicated fund, therefore making sure that there's more money for the other OIP participants. Whether it's things like the dedicated Creators Fund, a substantial fund that allows really significant state commissions to be given to individual organisations or individual creatives for that one precious thing that they need, time to contemplate and deliver their projects. Whether it's the regional small presenters and regional communities funds, all of which have grown, or whether it's things like the Victorian Music Development Office, or things like the dedicated programs in Screen that Film Victoria deliver, or whether it's linking into areas such as the TAFE sector and the need to expand the state delivery of things like what's done at Melbourne Polytechnic in lots of creative spaces. And things like, if I can do a little bit of policy announcement here this evening, things like the very soon to be announced Victorian Independent Producers Initiative, a $2 million rollout of how we work across the independent and emerging theatre space to develop the rich ecology of theatre producers, theatre performers, writers, and all the infrastructure that goes with that. These are the kind of things. You create more opportunities, you fund them, and you make it easier for people to get access to them.
That actually segues quite perfectly into my next question, which was what your plans were to support cultural development and enterprise in regional and outer metropolitan areas. I believe Martin pretty much covered that. If you have anything to add there?
Well, the only thing I'd add is what's happening right now in partnership with the rollout that we've seen of things like White Night to the Regions, the Central Bendigo and Goldfields creative efforts that are being delivered right here and right now, the support that we're dealing with Regional Arts Victoria to expand many of their programs, and equally things like taking Arena to Bendigo, taking support to the SAM in Shepparton or Ararat for some of that cultural institutional building, but making sure that you do it in a way that reflects the diversity and creativity that is peculiar to those communities. For instance, SAM in Shepparton, making sure that there's a strong Indigenous component to that, that also levers off the great work that they have of one of the best ceramic collections in the nation, making sure that it's not just the city coming to the regions, but that you reflect what is peculiar and strength in those regions and the multiplicity of opportunities that if again you work with the different levels of government, that you can really build a strong, vibrant, creative culture right across Victoria.
So the same question, regional and outer metropolitan, and if you want to announce any policy statements, as the other two have kind of snuck in right now, this is your moment. Go right ahead.
Well, we know that people in outer metro regions report having the least access to the arts and creative industries, or feel as if they do. There's followed by regional areas compared to the metropolitan areas, which seem to see themselves as having the most access and pretty well do have the most access to arts and creative industries. So I think that Regional Arts Victoria has been doing good work, and I'd like to see that work supported and expanded. And I was mentioning local government before. Local government has a great role to play, but in terms of funding, often struggle, and particularly with the rate capping that has been introduced for local government. That means that in order to grow the pool for all of the things that people want their local governments to fund, that has been severely limited. But having said that, working with Creative Victoria, the local government, and particularly funding and resourcing the outer metropolitan areas, I think is where we need to focus.
Heidi?
Thanks, Sammy. We've done an awful lot out in the regions, obviously historically, but also recently you may have seen an announcement that we are going to give $1 million if we're elected to the Camperdown Theatre Royal, or the Royal Theatre, an amazing place that's a real community hub. And we've done several announcements like that across the state. And it's not just used for its theatre, but it's used by the local ballet schools and those type of things. So again, it's about getting the young people involved, but it's used, as I say, very much as a community hub. Back in January, a year and a half ago, we also announced the Victorian City of Culture. And the Victorian City of Culture, if any of you know, the European City of Culture is based loosely around the same sort of idea. And it's about taking the focus to a region for 6 months at a time. And we know that that works. So of the 40-odd European cities of culture that have experienced what has happened, it gives them, they bid for it, and it's a couple of years in advance, and it gives them the opportunity to focus their infrastructure spend, with their local councils and that sort of thing, but also to apply for grants. But what it does is it puts the focus onto that region for culture for those 6 months, and the economic impact and the job creation goes on after that. We know the economic impact of that in a positive way from a tourism perspective actually happens for about 3 or 4 years post being the City of Culture. So we'll create one of those. There's a $2 million funding pool for that, which we are very excited about, and I know some towns are already saying, pick me, and of course it will be regions. But you did say if we had any policies we'd like to announce.
You already got one in, yeah.
I might just throw in another one for you, Sammy, seeing as we've got all of our good friends here. And obviously you're the ones who have made the effort. You've turned up today, so you might as well be the first to hear. So the Community Arts and Festivals Fund, a $640,000 investment, and again, because I wear a few hats, not as many as Sue, but a few hats, I can actually see where the cross-pollination has to happen. And so what we're going to do is invest in those beautiful grassroots festivals that so often have the ability to develop into larger events and therefore cultural and economic attractors to their regions. So I look at things like Wangaratta Jazz Festival. A whole lot of people loved a lot of jazz a long time ago, and now it is a great tourism drawcard and economic stimulus for the area. You can think of enough of those sort of examples of your own. So we're going to support those festivals so that they can take it to the next level. And so I think that that's something that the regions will find very enticing, that can make a real difference to communities, obviously promoting the fact that they can then develop their own content, but then put it on display, have people come from interstate, intrastate, or even from the big smoke, and go out and see what they've got to offer. And then that may also lead to a tree change for a lot of people.
Thank you. We're going to open the floor to the questions in just one moment. I have one final question to ask. This one's not really prepared or anything. It just kind of ripped from the weekend's headlines. It's a bit about art, and it's a bit about commerce, and it's a bit about the intersection of the two. I suppose basically in Sydney, as we know, both major parties have come out in support of putting horse racing advertising on the Sydney Opera House. Were the same situation be presented here? Martin, starting from you, where would you fall on that decision?
Well, given that every year as members of Parliament, our good friends at the Victorian Racing Council send us season passes, I sent mine back, and I would oppose any move that would, for instance, flash something up on the water wall here or hang something from the Arts Centre spire of that particular nature. The reason you have independent statutory separation from government of your cultural organisations is so they can be bold, so they can make sure that they are not entrapped in this peculiar Sydney culture that a few spivs think they can intimidate leading arts industry cultural leaders. I would oppose it. Having said that, I think the Arts Centre spire and the Parliament of Victoria and the front wall here are fantastic things that reflect their independence, and when they choose to do things like support marriage equality, support white knight, support those things that reflect their values, then that is a good thing. So I can assure you Melbourne Cup betting and the colours of racehorses or equivalents won't be happening to any cultural institutions under a portfolio, not that I lead, but that the organisations themselves run.
Sue, very quickly.
Well, you may remember that one of the portfolios I have is racing, but it's not necessarily always supporting the racing industry, because I have a lot of issues with racing, not least the cruelty that's involved to animals, particularly in jumps racing, and the gambling that's involved in it, and particularly the online betting that's growing, etc. So obviously it's a ridiculous idea to be putting that on the Opera House. So I totally reject it. And I'd also like to say that the treatment of the CEO of the Opera House was completely shocking and appalling.
Heidi?
Not big on the races. Never win. But I can't see us ever putting the colours of horses up on this beautiful building. Having said that, when this building is illuminated through white night and things like that, obviously it looks fantastic. I think there is room, though, for some commercial sponsorship. If you've only got to have a look at the forecourt, it has a name. If you have a look at our NGV down at Federation Square, it has a name. And it has a name because people gave a lot of money. There is, of course, an aspiration to build NGV3. It's not going to happen purely by people walking in the door and saying, I'm going to give you money. There is going to have to be sponsorship. We know that. So I think it's a balance. Horse racing, I don't know, is exactly that balance. But I do think we need to understand that there is some commercialisation, not of the content. There should never be commercialisation of what, and organisations dictating, or commercial organisations dictating what we put on the inside of these places. That's not part of any agreement. But I think we also understand that great buildings and great spaces are no longer built simply because governments have spare change.
Thank you. We're going to open the floor to questions. If you have a question, raise your hand. Someone with the microphone will come across. And more importantly, when you do ask your question, if you could first give your name and then the name of the organization that you are representing, and then ask your question. And I ask once again that you do make it a question, not a monologue or a manifesto, which you just add a lilt at the end of it to make it sound like a question. I suppose let's start right here in the front, second row.
My name's Sarah McKenzie. I'm from the Media Entertainment Arts Alliance, which is the union that represents workers. Hold back. That represents workers in the creative industries. So my question is to all of you, and please don't dodge my question because it has an element of federal politics in it. So we are seeing large amounts of casualisation in the workforce at our arts venues. People are often working across multiple arts venues to be able to make a living wage. Enterprise bargaining is not working in this context anymore. What we're hearing from our members is that they want industry bargaining. They want to be able to have the same rates of pay and conditions at the MTC, at the Malt House, at the Recital Centre. So my question is, what do you think of industry bargaining, and how would you work with your federal colleagues to make that a reality? And for Martin in particular, is there any plan to be able to industry bargain just in Victoria if that doesn't become a reality on the federal stage?
Just Martin, yeah, if you could, you just have to answer
I'll
one
try
of
not
those
to
if possible.
say the obvious that, you know, a lot of this is regulated federally. Take that as a given, as you've suggested. And insofar as the state as an employer, it's really not beyond these cultural organisations, which are pretty big employers in their own right. And there's a lot we can do there. Essentially, we do industry bargain across our cultural organisations now through particularly the CPSU. And as a former trade union official myself, I'm a great believer in making sure that there's a solid platform beneath which bargaining does not take place. So I totally get the notion of sector-wide bargaining. In those areas where we're not the employer but we're the funder, that's our role. How do we promote the workforce opportunities? How do we fund the organisations so as to not see what we've seen for the last decade, a continual erosion of, if you take just the ABS stats, of what has been the income of people who self-describe as artists through the census. It's actually been going backwards in real terms. And there's lots of really good currency house papers out there that talk about the need to organise in a particular creative way, and I would encourage that. But the state's role is how to make sure that that competition is taken out of what cultural organisations pay to creatives to stop that driving downwards pressure on creatives, so we don't have things that see the platform taken away from which people's rates of pay, fees, etc. are deducted in a downward spiral. And that's a complex area where you're not the regulator of terms and conditions of employment, but the levers that the state has is through its funding. More funding, better targeted, and putting standards and opportunities like we've seen in live music, and give a shout out to the live music sector for making sure that things like ending sexual violence and making people sign up to particular protocols about how we do that. Those are the kind of models that I think give us the opportunity to build progressively the platforms, whilst at a policy level arguing with whoever the federal government is as to what does sector-wide approaches to these things look like. Having said that, you can't have a growth in industry sector bargaining in this area federally if all you're doing through the Australia Council, the primary funder of such organisations, is attacking the funding base, particularly of the small, medium and independent organisations that we've seen over the last 5 years.
I'm going to offer, just for due to time considerations, unless you have a point of difference, you can just say ditto and tap out of it. All right? Yep.
No, I did want to say something if I could. So I won't say goes too long, but just to say, well, the Greens do support the introduction of more industry-wide pattern bargaining, or industry-wide bargaining into the industrial relations system, because enterprise bargaining hasn't always worked well for low-income and, need I say, not very well unionised workforces or workers. So we do support that, and as I mentioned earlier, we also think that in terms of supporting artists who do have to work for several gigs, for example, and workers in the so-called gig economy, we need to look at how their conditions and wages have been going backwards. And in terms of support for artists at the federal level, I mentioned that's the Greens policy to allow for Centrelink payments for artists that are involved in community arts projects or certain criteria to be met, and also a superannuation scheme for artists, and I think that will help as well.
Heidi, would you like to?
Look, just that, I've had a very long history of working in the MEAA, so Howard was there for a very long time. I'm very happy to continue those discussions.
Thank you. Any other questions? Let's try getting someone from the back if possible, just all the way in the back over there. Yes.
Thank you. My name's Tanya Davidge, and I'm part of a group of concerned citizens. We're currently running the Our City, Our Square campaign. We're opposed to the Apple Store at Federation Square. And one of the reasons I'm so concerned about this is that I'm an architect and I'm also a public artist. For me, the public realm is really important to public art and to creative and cultural expression. So considering the current outcry over the Opera House acting as advertising for a horse race, what are the candidates' positions on the demolition of Federation Square's Yarra building to make way for an Apple Store which will brand our civic and cultural square in a similar manner?
Martin, starting with you.
Well, the Minister for Major Events and Tourism, who leads this policy area, has made the government's position clear. The government's position is to proceed with the Apple Store as set out to replace the Yarra building, which for all of its now many benefits, nonetheless does not necessarily deliver on the original vision of the square.
We're opposed to the Apple Store at Federation Square and have been ever since it was first announced. The Federation Square is public land and it should be for uses that are in the public interest and not commercialised to the extent, particularly for such a huge global multinational, which can easily find a site for its Apple Store on private land somewhere else for which it can pay.
Well, I think you've got both sides of the argument there. It doesn't matter what I say.
Well, let's give it a shot.
Yeah. Look, I listened to one of the original architects, and so I hear as an architect there about his... he was actually... I thought it was very interesting. They actually came in and briefed us in Parliament, and he said, and I said, but surely you can't be suggesting that you want to see one of your buildings go. And he said, actually, it's not doing what we thought it would do, and I'm okay with it going. And I thought, okay. And then, of course, the Apple Store first vision came about, and we all looked at it and went, very odd. And, of course, then there's that factor of commercialisation, which I talked about before. Having been minister, I understand what it costs to run Federation Square. But then I look to overseas, and my partner and I travel a lot, and you don't see big brandings in the middle of the great public squares of the world. So I think we need to investigate how it is that they continue to do what they do and offer a beautiful public space without having to go down that path.
All right. Next question. If we can get lady in red over there.
Thank you. My name's Angela Savage. I'm Director of Riders Victoria. I had one job today, which was to fly the flag for Riders Victoria. I failed. It was my banner that collapsed. So I'm here to do that in person. Thank you very much for your presentations. I've just wanted a quick question, actually, and it's quite a general one, though I see opportunities for writers within it, which is that we have an enormous amount of infrastructure work going on in this state at the moment, planned and current. And I just think there's some opportunities for an integrated arts strategy within that infrastructure development that we haven't yet seen realised. There's a potentiality there that hasn't been tapped into that could create wonderful opportunities in Metro and regional Victoria to showcase Victorian art, both across a whole lot of practices, visual art, film, writing, performance. So just interested in whether that's on the agenda at all. Thank you.
Heidi? Yeah, if you can go first.
Okay. Do you want me to answer that from a writing point of view? Okay. I think it's actually true of any of the disciplines. So I think what we have to do is make sure that those opportunities are there no matter where they're created, at the very smallest level, right through to obviously somewhere grand like the Wheeler Centre. And I've got to say, is anybody here from the Wheeler Centre? Your Wheeler Centre as well, of course you are. We've thoroughly enjoyed going to some of the discussion series, and I think that that's something, and things like that should be greatly encouraged because, as I said, my 15-year-old daughter is here who is an aspirational writer. So I'm not one of those mothers who said, you can't be an artist, and even worse, you can't be a writer. So she's gone out and she's listened to as many as she can, and I think we need to have those sort of opportunities out there. So I think it's a matter of obviously creating the infrastructure for those sort of things to take place in, but also to make sure that we're utilising as many opportunities in the regions as we can. I mean, obviously we were great supporters of Clunes and those sort of things in the time. I don't even know where to go. But I think, obviously from a writing point of view, we are a very, very proud literary state. And you can see that by the amount of literary awards that we have. I mean, I hold the Victoria Awards. It's just the name, sorry folks, it doesn't mean to sound really grand, but the Victoria Awards for creative writing in every one of my schools in my electorate. And I want to encourage the kids from the time they're in foundation year right through to get out there and find that inner voice and learn how to express themselves. I think it's one of those great life skills that hopefully then they get a love for writing and want to take it further.
If anyone has a different answer, or we can move on to the next question. Right?
Well, thank you for your question. Just wanted to add that, as I was saying before, we're looking at ways the planning scheme can be strengthened to support the arts and also to preserve our cultural heritage better than it already is. So I hope that helps too.
A different approach is that this gives us an opportunity to lever off one of the new areas in which Creative Victoria has had a particular focus. That is the whole notion of design. There's the whole notion that design can cut across much of the traditional different platforms of what we see culture and art participating around. And I would like to think that the massive infrastructure investment that we've got underway in the state gives us an ideal opportunity to take that notion of design into the public realm in a way that we haven't had the opportunity for the best part of a century. We've already seen a little bit of it up at the museum station on the above ground stuff, but and perhaps it's not as well enunciated as it should be, but embedded in all of the stuff around the metro stations themselves, whether it's the art trams work that's underway and been going on and off since the 70s, the investment that the state can bring to transform not just the infrastructure delivery, but the aesthetic of the city and the design notion of the city, and therefore drive across different platforms all sorts of new opportunities for creatives is an unbridled opportunity that we need to bridle and capture. And I think we're already starting to see that in Ararat, in Geelong, through the GPAC work and the other work that was done across the road by the former government at the library. We've right across the state, those big cultural and infrastructure investments give us the opportunity to lift this notion of the civic space, the civic intersectionality that design can drive all sorts of opportunities that we have not really yet begun to deliver, and I'd like to think we can do that.
All right. I think we have time for one final question. If we can have the gentleman right here in the suit.
Thank you for the excellent presentations. I think we got a slightly clearer idea of where you are going, whoever wins the elections. It was interesting, the word multiculturalism and diversity was...
sorry, before if you could just give your name and which
organization. Okay, sorry. My name is
represent.
Srinivasan. I'm from the Multicultural Arts Victoria. The interesting thing was I never found, none of the speakers mentioned the word diversity or multiculturalism throughout these three presentations. It's probably not a big deal because I know your hearts are in the right places. But what I want to know is, do you have any specific ideas, apart from what you're doing? Creative industry is doing excellent job. The previous government have done good job, no problem. What specifically are you going to do to make our Victorian state arts scene more representative of the demographic diversity we have, which we are not finding in the other parts of the arts scene? So what are your thoughts to improve the situation?
Sue, if we can start with you, then we'll go to Martin, and then with Heidi.
Thank you, Sammy, and thank you for your question. And also thank you for your newsletter, which arrives in my inbox regularly, and I do look at it. I think, and I apologise if I didn't mention the word multicultural, but certainly when I was saying, when I was speaking earlier about inclusiveness and equal participation of everybody in the community, well, I did mean that, so I apologise for not specifically saying that. But certainly there has been some wonderful arts coming out of our multicultural communities, and I think what needs to happen is sort of what I was saying before, where the local government, supported by the state creative industries, actually are proactive in going around and finding out who's there producing things and supporting them in those productions, so that the rest of the community can see them and participate in them.
Martin?
Thank you. So the whole notion of how we represent the diversity of our state is at the heart of the Creative State Strategy, and the diversity inclusion programs are but one reflection of that, through which, as you well know, Multicultural Arts Victoria, through the Organisational Investment Program, continues to receive locked-in support and growing support. So how to make sure that that then works in supporting both individual artists, emerging communities in particular, as well as long-established communities, as well as First Peoples, is how our multicultural reflection of our diversity gets locked in. And when we talk of the rich ecology in our 5 pillars of the Creative State Strategy, that's where you'll find the support for diversity, not just multicultural diversity, but gender identity, sexuality, regional and rural, disabilities, all of the intersectionality groups that, particularly when you bring those different lenses of diversity together, that's where the most interesting work is. And I'd like to think that creative state policy, having set a benchmark for that, should we be in a position in 2020 when that policy comes up for review, that we'll be able to further build on that and perhaps persuade you that that is actually at the heart of the strategy that is underway at the moment.
Thank you, and congratulations to everybody at Multicultural Arts Victoria for the years and years of great pleasure you've given my family and I, and the people of Victoria, because of the presentations that you give, for the possibilities you present to us. We understand more about other people's culture, and we then become one Victoria. And I'm really so much more richer, if that's a word, more rich for having experienced so many of those things. And the Burundian drummers, they're always a hit. They are fantastic. But I think one of the things that we need to remember is, as a peak body, you do amazing work, but there's an awful lot of work being done out in the suburbs as well. So, for example, I have the Chinese Association of Victoria, and they have, I was out there a couple of weeks ago with the Mooncake Festival, and they were teaching the children how to do some of the traditional Chinese art with blowing the inks and that sort of thing. Mine didn't look as good as the kids, but I gave it a go. But making sure that they get to experience whatever it is that perhaps was left behind a generation ago, understand it and carry it forward proudly, and then making sure that the platform is there for that to be able to be displayed for the sake of all Victorians. So there are lots of, obviously, grant programs that are available for presenting, but it's also making sure that they are interested, as the next generations come through, in preserving that heritage.
I think we have time for one more question. Before you raise your hands, I want you to consider whether it's really short, and if it isn't, if you could lower your hands. The shortest question wins, right there in the corner.
Hi, my name is Evie. I'm a 17-year-old, and my first ever live music experiences have been through gigs that the wonderful organisation The Push has put on at unlicensed premises. And I just wanted to know what all of your parties are doing in support of all ages music. And as you said, you have a young daughter. How would you like it for more opportunities for her to be able to be immersed in live music and opportunities to pursue her career in the creative field as well. Thank you.
Blue light disco and above.
Oh no, I went through all that. I'm in my 50s now. Everybody who remembers blue light discos probably wishes they didn't. Thank you. In fact, I ferried her off to see Rule. You'd be proud of me that I know who Rule is, wouldn't you, Patty? Last week it was an under-18s gig. She's been to an under-18s, I think that was at the Corner Hotel. They did another one over in Northcote not so long ago. So she's always been out and about at live music with me. And I think the opportunity to, again, it's about getting in at the grassroots and getting kids interested from an early level, but also giving them the freedom to explore what they might not know about. So being able to get out to live gigs in a very safe environment, and we know that obviously there are lots of horrible people out there who would do our children harm, and I speak now as a mum. But the opportunity to have underage gigs and opportunities for young people to perform. She happens to be a trumpeter, and so she has an octet playing this Friday night. I hope you've done your practice, kiddo. And so making sure that there are opportunities for young people to explore different genres and actually learn, as much about different types of music, but then if they do want to go on to be practitioners, to have the opportunity to do that, but also, do it in a very, very safe environment.
Sue?
Thank you for your question. And as I mentioned, live music is my favourite, and I've been attending live music gigs since I was young, so a long time ago. I won't say how many years ago when that started. And it was a very different situation from what it is now. I think in some ways it's better now, in some ways it's harder, because in some ways we're losing a lot of venues, particularly smaller venues, for live music. But Music Victoria has been doing a great job in promoting venues, etc., and promoting live music. And as I said earlier, I think we do need more funding for young and emerging artists as well through the state, and the other opportunities through local government, and local government hosting these events supported by the state government as well.
Thanks for that fantastic question. The Push are a wonderful organisation that I'm glad to see are now moving into the Collingwood Arts Precinct with the support and cooperation with Music Victoria and the Victorian Music Development Office, because they're successful in what they do. We need to make sure that the work that's been done to some extent, some quite successful extent at the moment, about making sure that the barriers to all ages or different ages gigs and venues continue to be removed. The regulatory stuff continues to erode in the face of that. We do not need to go down not just the Sydney version of putting stuff on public buildings, but we certainly don't need to kill live music through the arm of lockouts and regulatory burdens of those natures. What we need to do is find greater ways and greater opportunities through the engagement of the Push, through the engagement of the VMDO, through the engagement of Music Victoria, and more importantly, through engaging with the venues themselves to provide those kind of opportunities. And organisations that particularly focus on the particular needs of young emerging musicians and supporters, like Girls Rock, that provide that opportunity and that platform for really targeted support for people, and young women in particular, to follow their passion into live music. You don't become the live music capital of the world, as measured by per capita number of gigs per population that Victoria now is, without a really comprehensive, multi-pronged approach, of which engaging the next generation of live music, both practitioners and fans, is at the heart of.
Thank you very much. I'd like to give a big round of applause to our guests today, Martin Foley, Sue Pennicue, and Heidi Victoria. Thank you. And if we can invite Andy Miller back on stage. Yeah.
Okay, yes, we can. Yeah. Okay, I don't need to hop on stage, but just a big thanks to Sammy Shah for incredible, swift, deft, skillful moderation. Thank you again to all the party representatives. That's fantastic. It's great to hear that. Thank you from the floor for all those questions. Sorry we didn't have longer because I could sense that kind of burning energy in the room. People really wanted to know, play more things. I want to thank Osei and Abdi for doing the filming today, and also the Auslan interpreters. Big round of applause for all those guys for making sense of all that. That's incredible. So, and that's a wrap. And I think everyone's heading off to another function. Thank you very much.